In 2017, on the heels of the Africa Accession Project, driven by the mandate of the Museums Association of Namibia, MAN, to support and strengthen those dedicated to preserving and the repatriation of Namibia's national heritage, the MAN team, led by the late Dr. Jeremy Sylvester, together with the University of Namibia, the National Museum of Namibia, the Humboldt University Zoo Berlin, and the Berlin Ethnological Museum, ignited a visionary initiative, Confronting Colonial Pasts, Envisioning Creative Futures. As the team prepared a funding proposal for the Gerda Henkel Foundation in 2018, they had a bold dream: to be the first project to facilitate a multifaceted restitution process that goes beyond the mere repatriation of cultural belongings. Instead, the team dreamt of a project centered around restitution, which encompasses academic research, community-driven processes and workshops, artistic interpretation and expression, exhibition development, capacity building, and beyond. By June 2022, the first phase of the project, which had started in 2019, drew to an end. The team, which had now grown immensely, celebrated the official opening of the Museum of Namibian Fashion in Otjiwarongo and the successful repatriation of 23 cultural belongings.
I don't know whether it's the people, like the receivers, or those ones, or the European countries. But then when they are returning these objects, what do they look at? Like, why did they take these 23?
We consider things like rarity, because of course there's also a question about these collections in European museums and how much of the belongings that are there exist in the spaces from which they originate right now, obviously due to like colonial activity, Christianity, globalization, all of that. So rarity is one of the big main criteria we looked at. We looked at even things like cultural and spiritual significance, of course. We looked at criteria like attractiveness, because we wanted them very much to inspire collections for the Museum of Fashion. So that is also something that they considered.
One criterion was it should be inclusive of different groups in Namibia. It should be unproblematic to transport the objects, to store them in Namibia. The objects should be significant. Conditions had to be made that one can actually store these objects safely in a proper environment.
It was a very intense journey for all of us. We all come with our histories and we're all implicated in a certain way. I'm implicated. I'm Austrian, but still I worked in an institution which holds these collections, and I'm the one also opening these collections up to people that might get hurt, very deeply hurt, by the things that they see and that we discover in the archives, which are horrific atrocities, genocide, but also daily violence and sexual violence against women and children. So it's a deeply disturbing collection once you reconnect them with the histories of acquisition.
I remember we were looking at some photographic albums that were documented between 1904 and 1908, and you get into, they are quite traumatic images where you see a picture of a person taken when they are alive and then when they are no longer, and you take time out.
You turn the page, you see an execution. You turn the page, you see the same soldier playing with a dog. It's like the banality of evil. And then you think you've seen it all, and you turn the page, and there is child pornography. Like, on a human level, it's deeply haunting, because obviously it takes a different toll on people implicated by being survivors of genocide and colonial wars. But still, on a human level, it's deeply disturbing and haunting.
Sometimes when you deal with something very dark and heavy, and I guess it's because you deal with it so many times. I don't know if it has become a part of me or I've manage to switch it off.
I would be dishonest in saying I've reconciled with it and I'm just fine. I can just see like a human remains or like something that has human remains on it. I mean, there's the examples of the anklets ongondo that are copper and they're fully bound. So when you find one that's fully bound and it looks like it's been worn in the museum, how did it get off that leg? And then you're left sitting there holding it with plastic gloves, wondering, was it just made for show? Was it already just made and then for the museum? Was it made for sale? Or did it have to be removed without being cut? The ones that are cut open, you say, okay, it was cut open. That makes sense. They burnt it open or whatever. But when you see a doll that belonged to a child and you ask yourself, who is this child? And what happened? And did they give it? What happened? Was it a doll made for sale? Or was it a doll that belonged to someone, to some child? And what happened? Where is that child? And where are the descendants of that child? And am I one of the descendants of that child? I don't know.
And I think the bigger challenge is it's my responsibility to deal with these topics. Because if I avoid them, then I won't be able to fulfill my responsibility as an employee of the Museums Association and also the mandate that is expected from us. So on most days, you learn to deal with it, cope with it.
At the end of the day, we have a job to do. We have an assignment to complete, and that's really what we want to share with the rest of Namibians, to know about the hidden parts of their history, to know about the hidden parts of their past and heritage.
Through the art and the artists in this project, I think I've realized that in the scholarly work about colonial violence, we sometimes don't have the spaces for, let's say, mourning, the spaces to really bring in emotion and see what different emotions we have. You know, the way I'm struck by the colonial violence that I see, for example, in historical photography, is still very different from certainly what an Oshihiro or Nama-speaking person in Namibia has that's looking at such a photograph. But I think there's a potential in letting emotions happen and use them also in order to feel and sense, you know, how can we reach some common ground to talk about this violent history.
And I think for people like us, being faced with the kind of history that we've been faced with, we have no option but to heal. Now the healing is not like sitting in a corner and taking a couple of breaths and, you know, centering yourself. It's a lot more complicated and more painful than that. Because the things that you have to unpack and repack are heavy. They go all the way back. They go 150, 200, 300 years back. And being underexposed to that history as we are, it's almost like your healing journey becomes fragmented. Because the pieces that you need to build yourself back to whatever that version of yourself is, clash or are missing. You know? And so it's really, as much as it's a finding of the history, it's a finding of the self. And that's why it's so important and becomes so important for me to start using two terms as I describe myself walking around in the world. Is indigenous is one, and the other one is descendant, right? Indigenous as per the definition as we know it, but descendant in the sense that, like, I don't see myself as like a descendant of a murdered people per se only. I see myself as a descendant of a cultural genocide as well. I see myself as a victim of an identity genocide as well. So it leaves you with this resounding, deep feeling of being internally displaced, both domicile-wise, like physically, but also inside of yourself.
The fact that these things were removed by people, you know, it was salvage, okay, anthropology, yes, there was that interest, but also the impact of Christianity. With the missionaries not wanting people carrying this because they were seen as, pagan or devilish. Now, if you were to remove that and also remove the continuation, you know, the knowledge is lost.
And I use this analogy where I say, you know, I feel like our people had songs for heartache, or for childbirth, or for coming of age. And we still have to come of age, we still have to bear children, and we still have to get married, but we have to do those things without those rituals and without those songs. You know, so I always find myself in moments of despair or trial and tribulation, or you know, when I'm going through something, I can't shake this feeling of feeling like something is missing, like a comfort, a bridge, a way through a difficult time. And that's why I talk about the cultural genocide and the identity genocide and the ritual genocide, the genocide of our rituals, you know. And this is, and people are like, okay, what does that mean, Keith? I said, no, it's not complicated or convoluted. Just look to the museums. If white people were not intentionally trying to do something with our cultural items, they would have left it here. They would have rendered it or seen it useless and left it here. So we must also interrogate what it is that white people actually took from us.
Bringing this back so that we could see this, actually, I think it's dignifying us because it's bringing back our cultural identity and also appreciating what, you know, these are the things that we had. Because people really have this inferior complex, because we always look up to the Westerners and think, oh yeah, oh, the dollars, you know, we were comparing everything that we do like we didn't have anything.
And I'm going to start by borrowing from a very respected academic in South Africa, Professor Siraj Rasool, who actually argues that there is a big difference between repatriation and restitution. He says, even if you look at the German term for this, it's Rückgabe, giving back. We may have to stop thinking about restitution, but start thinking about restitutionary work, a process. Because restitution does not happen as an event, it's a process.
Tapping into the Confronting Colonial Pasts aim of the project, Phase 1, through multiple capacity building programs tailored specifically for Namibian museums, over 30 museum professionals acquired the expertise needed to document and conserve their valuable collections. For the National Museum of Namibia, where the 23 cultural belongings reside, the project facilitated the employment of a conservator, 2 documentalists, renovations, and the purchase of equipment and storage, which facilitated the documentation and digitization of the national collection. On the academic front, the first phase of the project facilitated 3 postgraduate research internships and 2 scholarships for a Master of Arts in Material Culture. Over 3 years, the curator of the Museum of Namibian Fashion, also employed by the project, worked closely together with the MAN team, the advisory board, composed of fashion designers, artists in different disciplines, cultural knowledge keepers, and academics to craft the museum and its collection through research and multi-stakeholder workshops.
We tend to now work with different community members in different rural areas to create workshops. We try to locate fashion designers within all the 14 regions to bring them together at one space so they can interact with the 23 objects that were coming back home. The idea from the Museum of Namibian Fashion is to allow them to interact with the objects and create contemporary design out of it. And from that project, we have managed to commission 5 fashion designers from there that were responsible to create new products or that had links to that to the 23 objects. So we wanted them to initially spark that idea of taking knowledge from our ancestors and also designs from our ancestors to create new contemporary Namibian design so that we can have a Namibian identity that is linked to our ancestor in terms of design.
Capacity building initiatives expanded even further, employing another conservator, 2 research interns, 2 research assistants, providing 6 scholarships for a postgraduate diploma in heritage conservation and management, and new exhibitions and skills transfer workshops themed around traditional leather tanning and beadwork were facilitated for young Namibians by cultural knowledge keepers, hosted by the Museum of Fashion. A remarkable offshoot of the project Confronting Colonial Pasts, Envisioning Creative Futures is the Artistic Research Communal Knowledge, ARCK for short, project. ARCK brought together cultural knowledge keepers, 7 community researchers, and 6 artists from across Namibia to create an exhibition featured at the National Art Gallery of Namibia, which reawakened and reinterpreted the narratives embedded within the 23 repatriated cultural belongings.
We had the decision already made after the return of the objects in Germany that this is the property of Namibia, and we had to sign the finalizing document on both sides, just kind of symbolic more or less. But this is something which I found personally very important to do today.
These cultural belongings were made by people. And the people who understand how things are made, you have to call the artists and the designers. There's no way you are going to have anything concrete without involving that voice of the creatives.
The biggest reason why we collaborated with the National Art Gallery, or actually went out to look for funding for this, was we wanted to open this discussion and this discourse to more creatives, museum terminology and archives, it only reaches a certain sector. And with this, we were hoping that more feet could also enter into the museum spaces, apart from tourists and school trips. We really want to engage communities. We want to work with communities. And as a museum, I think we have that responsibility to, when we have displays and exhibitions, to only display and exhibit cultural objects that we know something about, that we actually have information about. And this is why it's so important that we have community researchers that are in the field doing the actual research, so that they can take ownership, so that their communities are able to take ownership of projects like these. Because it's not our narrative as a national museum, but it's Namibia's, and it will still be there for your grandchildren to see. And there's a sense of pride in that. When someone is able to come and recognize something that belonged to their grandparents, but there's another story other than missionaries, but it's a story about someone local that you know.
You're bringing 7 amazing community researchers. They've got more insight, and such wealth of knowledge and background of their cultures and spaces that they come from. You're bringing 5 artists together who also have a vast background in working with the subject matter, whether it's around decolonizing work, artistic research. And you're bringing these great minds together to kind of create these amazing new narratives. So trust that they will also bring their part to it. And that's exactly what happened. The inputs that we got were so great, because it's so nice to hear from people outside your sector, because sometimes it can be quite insular, the thinking and the way that we work within our sectors. But having this perspective from community, from artists, in this very calm, very refreshed environment, around quite a heavy topic, I think was really, really great. I definitely learned a lot. The process of putting this together has been a learning process from the beginning, but it's been a good one.
And it was a great experience working with people who are so passionate, people who are so interested. And you can see that by the way they are sharing their ideas, their thoughts, and how much they are looking forward to the whole outcome of this project. And it also just shows that Namibia is ready to preserve their cultural heritage knowledge, and also to share and put it out there.
For me, it moves me a lot to see how, artists, media people, heritage professionals, oral historians, history experts, how they all come together and form like a community of care for these objects and for the histories behind them, for the skills, for the knowledge that have produced these objects.
The ARCK project is a good initiative, I believe, because I feel that we've always been told our story from a Western context, and now we get the opportunity to actually take our culture, artifacts into our own hands and create our narrative, tell it from our perspective. I'm not fluent in my mother tongue, and so there's this longing for knowing who you are. Of course, we are in a hybrid of modern culture and heritage culture, but we get to embrace the modern culture more, and this is an opportunity to tap into your heritage culture, to actually also embrace it in our urban society, the urban Namibian society. And for me, the takeaway was the fact that in school we're taught about our history as colonialism. We don't really talk about where we migrated from, who we were, what our skills were, and etc. And this can be very demeaning. It can give you an inferiority complex, subconsciously even. So this is very encouraging. It's liberating, also boosts one's morale that we can take our own stories into our own hands. Yeah.
Being a community researcher is like a messenger between the people who made the objects and the museum. You cannot just have the objects returned from, for example, Germany. When they get into the museum, no information about the objects. Now people will be walking into the museum, they want to see the objects, and there's no information.
One of the most, I think, challenging aspects of these collections is the mislabeling. It's the Ovambo doll. It's the Herero pants or Herero shoes. What is that? Nama bracelet. They make it, that's what makes them things or objects.
There are things that cannot be translated. It's not going to have the same meaning. It's not going to carry the true essence of what that means. To start with, some things don't even exist in the other, the other language or in the other culture. So you cannot have a true concept of what this means. So for you to reduce it to an Ovambo knife, you're already lost. Now, when you have someone claiming to be an expert because they studied an Ovambo knife, and for me, it's really repackaging the same, just finding maybe different ways of writing about it, but you're not bringing out the meaning because you don't have it and you don't know it. And it's not carried in this loose translation. Some things cannot be translated. Then leave it.
The entire idea of this exhibition is based on the concept of kuru, which is a word in Kwekwe Kovap, which means to mend and to create. That is the underlying and the root from where I'm processing from. Being in touch with the items made one realize that there are many things that needed to be mended, but also many that needed to be created. And what a beautiful way then to find a word in the language that means both of these things, that intersectionalizes creating and mending. And so then I was trying to find ways to create music, to create poetry, to mend the trauma, while speaking, of course, specifically to these items. I think as a performative artist that does experimental work, it is sometimes interesting to find ways to exhibit in a still place all of these different layers. So the concept of kuru helps me to not kill two birds with one stone, but collect the stones and let the birds fly as well.
So I use these dolls in two-dimensional formats to create different shapes, using different styles of these dolls, for example, or I use them as is, two-dimensional formats, where I usually show these dolls on these different backgrounds to tell the different narratives of our different African cultures, mainly for me focusing on the hair aspect. The doll, Watunwa, with that particular one, it reminded me of my childhood memories, because it's also one of the subject matters that I'm currently working with. My mom used to make these dolls for me, so it's something that I could deeply relate to. So seeing one like that was made during that time, during that era of the genocide. So my works was seeing like our ancestors can see and hear, even if they are not here in the present with us, they can still see and hear. So that inspiration came from Watunwa. Like, she can't speak, but when you look at her, when you touch Watunwa, when you, like, there's these words, like it's sort of like you're hearing whispers from your ancestors, like telling the story of Watunwa, telling their story, like, so it's like the shadows of our ancestors like still live within us, amongst us, you know.
The exhibition will be called Arusen. And Arusen is the word you use in Kwekwe when you talk about the dance, the spiritual dance around the fire. So the dance itself is called Arusen. The past memory will be represented by a newspaper, a mock newspaper that I'll be making called the Genocide Times, in which I will write articles, you know, factual, historically based articles from Hendrik Witboy's account in the Red Book, but I will also make up certain ones, but it will be noted in the newspaper which ones are factual and which ones are interpretive.
One of the things that I was interested in looking at, particularly with the objects, was this idea of like the materiality of the objects, what the object consists of and how that particularly connects to the land. But not only just the land, but also the people who work off of the land and use this knowledge.
The biggest impact for me was the fact that it was turned into an exhibition. That for me I felt was important, because I feel, especially with this conversation, the information is usually just left among the historians and the cultural community officers, but we never get to hear what the rest of the community has to say. So for me, the important part is that we made it available to everybody to come and see, from people from all walks of life, and even allowing the artists as well to engage, to express themselves, because this is where now you start hearing the original story related to these artifacts. So that is what we need to do, that it's not just about bringing the objects back, but that the community is engaged. Otherwise, what's the point?
Extensive public engagement through media, community engagement, and exhibitions has ensured that this project resonates widely across Namibia.
For future collaborations, there needs to be an honest dialogue from the beginning, in the sense that if you want to do something, be it from the artist side or the organization that have funds to donate for such projects. I think it's crucial that in the beginning there is mutual collaboration in which we talk about what do we want and what are we willing to give, so that throughout the process it can be seamless and easy, compared to where you find yourself in a situation where you don't have power to change something. So collaborations also need to be very flexible. For example, this project, the initial phase was in 2017. It's almost 7 years later now. And if we were stuck to the initial proposal, then we wouldn't have achieved this. If there's a need, or there's new discoveries, or there's new even terminology, the way we are referring to material culture now, or cultural assets or belongings, all of this they should have room for that to change, and that is how we can then say we had a successful collaboration, when both parties' voices are clearly heard.
And that's a very, very, very crucial aspect. Power relations that are that are unequal. And like in any other situation, if you don't have the means, you don't always call the shots. So the power dynamic is very, very crucial. And sometimes you hear people saying, yeah, we are partners, but maybe not so much equal. Maybe it's like animal farms or the rainbow. Some colors are more brighter than others. Even traveling, getting visas. I'm aware of, for instance, cultural exchange. And some people didn't even participate because they didn't even get a visa.
Listening is the most important method every German partner should have in a project like this. To understand the needs and interests of the people you're working with, in this case, Namibian curators, artists, communities. It's their cultural belongings, and they have to have time and the means to reflect and to think about what they need and how they want to welcome back their cultural belongings.
As Namibians, as government, we should look at our priority and determine that what is it that is urgent for us. What value do we keep on our own material culture that are outside? So I would recall that it's better for us to have funding streams from the Namibian government to support this initiative of repatriation, to support the cultural project, and to support the capacity building of the Namibian from the Namibian perspective, not only relying on the external funders.
Just because we have had community research done, just because we have had artists come in and engage with the 23 and produce something and interpret something, it doesn't by no means means this is where it needs to end. My hope and prayer is that it actually breeds, encourages more conversation and ignites something in somebody or 10 somebodies.
Oro hue ure in asa hui masen asa huna kuru is sa oru hai oro hue ure in asa hui masen hai asa huna guru is sa uru oro hue ure in asa hui masen asa huna guru is sa